Hi everyone. This week I want to highlight the UK premiere of Identidad, which is an essential piece of investigative work carried out by the film's co-directors Rodrigo Vasquez-Salessi and Florencia Santucho. Florencia is the sister of the subject of the film, Daniel, who is part of hundreds, maybe thousands of babies that were abducted at birth by the Argentinian authorities during the dictatorship in the late 70s, early 80s, when their mothers were abducted and held in clandestine detention centers and made to give birth in those centers, and then for the most part disappeared. So Daniel actually manages to trace his biological family through DNA testing, and the film focuses on that. Now, the feature film played at Biarritz, at the festival in Biarritz a couple of weeks ago to public acclaim, and this week is the UK premiere.
Yo soy Daniel Santucho Navajas y lo puedo decir porque hoy sé mi identidad.
And I'm speaking, of course, now to Rodrigo about the making of this film and about its wider repercussions today. So the first thing I want to ask you was about Danielle and how that process was of not only discovering his biological family, so what that was like for him psychologically, I guess, but then documenting that as part of this investigative work.
Yes, so I've been friends with the Santucho family for 20 years, and the possibility of Daniel's existence was ignored by me completely because when his mother was kidnapped and taken to a clandestine detention center in Buenos Aires, she was only 3 months pregnant, and there was only one letter that actually, insinuated the possibility of a pregnancy, and the family didn't want to, hope that, he'd been born because he could have been killed inside his mother's womb, like so many babies who, unborn, who were killed when their mothers were thrown from planes or killed in torture or executions during the military dictatorship. And Daniel was not aware of the fact that he was adopted until he was in his 30s. And, the family that stole his identity kept from him the fact that he was adopted first. And then when the woman who said the woman who stole him died, the man who stole him, who was a policeman and who worked as a policeman during the repression in Argentina and infiltrated left-wing groups, he sort of got together with another woman, and the person who was supposed to be Daniel's sister got very angry with him and only then revealed to Daniel that he was adopted. But she did not say that, she suspected that she was actually the son of a disappeared person, the son of one of the 30,000 disappeared people in Argentina. So he knew that he was adopted, and thanks to the work of Abuelas de Plaza de Mayo and Madres de Plaza de Mayo, who had campaigned to recover, to know the fate of so many disappeared people and to establish the identity of the 500 plus babies that were stolen during the dictatorship. Their work helped create a DNA data bank.
Durante 46 años me llamé Daniel González. Mi apropiador fue policía durante la dictadura.
Daniel's grandmother created the data bank because she thought that Daniel existed. She could never find her daughter but was determined to find him. And she died before Daniel was found. But thanks to her work, 132 others recovered their identity before Daniel did. And for Daniel, it was a shock when he went to give his blood sample, months before he was positively identified as the son of Cristina Navajas, a disappeared left-wing militant. He went to the Abuelas de Plaza de Mayo house, the house of identity. And like they do with all the people who are looking for their identity, he was given a book with some cases. And the case that he stopped to read was actually his mother's case, but he didn't know that that was his mother. And then a couple of months later, when he heard that the result was positive and that he was the son of Cristina Navajas, he was shocked because he knew her case already, because just something told him that he had to read that one particularly. And um and so the beginning of this story is when he recovers his identity and starts to get to know his biological family.
Thanks very much. You speak of trying to trace the destiny and the fate of all those babies that were kidnapped. So that was part of what looks like a blip in history, which is the Argentinian dictatorship, but it was part of a wider crackdown on, well, crackdown's a kind of light way of putting it, but on leftist movements around Latin America at that time. And yet here we are today. Argentinian President Milei has denied the numbers have disappeared, right? Because they're put at what, 30,000, and he's pretty much poo-pooed that number and is denying the scale of the atrocity. So what are the repercussions of that today? What's the context in Argentina, and is it still very much in people's psyches what happened?
Well, going back to Argentine history, we can find that, like all other settler countries, like the USA or South Africa, Argentina was founded on a genocide that was committed against the indigenous people. And part of that genocide included not only exterminating the indigenous population, but also stealing the babies and raising them, with white families, European families, and leaving their parents in concentration camps. So it's not, unfortunately, a blip in history. It's been a feature of Argentinian history. The massacres and the extermination of the other, and the construction of an enemy has been a feature of our history. In the 70s, the construction of the enemy had to do with creating an enemy out of the left-wing militants and activists. Like the construction of an enemy today is, anybody who is for Palestine is the enemy in Argentina, because Argentina has, the Argentinian government is closely associated with the Netanyahu government at this point in time. And so genocide is not a blip in history, in Argentinian history, is actually the norm. And there are moments in history where the middle class and the establishment resort to genocide, massacres, and concentration camps, and the elimination of an entire type of people. And this was one such event that is not studied at school. Like in the UK, people, students do not study the history of empire and all the massacres and crimes committed in Africa and Asia. Well, in Argentina, it's pretty much the same. I guess like in the USA, they do not study the Vietnam War the way they should, which was also genocidal. So yes, there is a pattern that, the case of the disappeared in the 70s and early 80s it was the latest iteration of that pattern. And it was probably the one with the highest profile, thanks to the work done by the grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo and the mothers of Plaza de Mayo, those who survived the repression, and made it a matter of conscience to continue the work of the people who were disappeared in trying to create a better a better society, uh, one that is more, fair, and where, there is more equality, and where, the law doesn't only serve the few. So, after the dictatorship was over, thanks to the Malvinas War, the commanders who had ordered and conducted the genocide were tried, and there was a film made and nominated to the Oscar about that, a few actually. And after that, there was a pardon. For 10 years. The assassins and the torturers were free, roaming the streets. And it was only this century, at the beginning of this century, thanks to the work of the children of the disappeared, who formed a group called Hijos, Children of the Disappeared, uh, a movement that I joined and made films about. We started going out to knock on the torturers and the assassins' doors and claiming for justice. The government took that agenda, and they started bringing the people to justice. There are hundreds of military personnel who were tried, and Milei today, like pretty much like in all the other countries where the extreme right is gaining power, he wants to rewrite history and present the assassins and the torturers as heroes. And so that's what we are up against. When we started making the film, Milei had not been yet elected as president. He was elected, and then we continued making the film, and he started cracking down on the human rights organizations. He eliminated the unit to recover, the stolen babies. He sort of closed down the archive of memory, and he started repressing the human rights organizations, calling them subversives, children of terrorists. And so that affected Daniel and the family, but we, you know, took it upon ourselves to continue making the film as a way of struggling against the attempt to rewrite history and to justify genocide.
I have a quick question, which sounds kind of very basic, but even someone like me does not know what the status is now of the indigenous population of Argentina. Is there still a population? Do they speak their own language? Where are they at?
Yes, I mean, throughout America, there were victims of genocide from Alaska to Cape Horn, and there were between 50 million and 150 million people exterminated by the European invasion. There's not a single Holocaust museum to reflect on what was done then for centuries. There isn't a single Holocaust museum in Argentina to commemorate the terrible fate of most indigenous population. There are groups of indigenous people who today are fighting for their rights to their language, their land, and to their way of living. And they have been systematically under attack, not only in Argentina, but throughout South America, but especially in Argentina, because Argentina was especially racist. You can find, for example, black population. Argentina was part of the slave trade, yet you can hardly find any black people in Argentina because, it was a particularly brutal the treatment of black people who were, in theory, freed in 1813, yet they were chained and sent to fight the wars of liberation as cannon fodder.
Tenía dudas de si realmente se podía haber apropiado de mí.
And racism continues as well, and despite, all of this, we still see repression against the indigenous people and indigenous groups fighting for their rights. And, the Minister of Security, the Interior Ministry of Argentina, is led by a woman who has been always in charge of repressing the indigenous people. Is the same person who calls the children of the disappeared subversives and terrorists. So you can see that there's a line that unites, that brings together those two struggles. It makes sense because the same methods were used by the state terror, to to get rid of the other